You never contributed anything to this family." Those words still echo in my mind like a death sentence, cutting deeper than any blade ever could. My dad declared this at our family dinner table while the entire room applauded like I was some kind of villain in their twisted little play. My chest tightened so hard I thought my ribs might crack, but I forced that familiar smile, the same one I'd been wearing my whole damn life, and whispered the words that would change everything. "Perfect." Then the $6,000 I've been paying for your mortgage every month stops today. Dad choked on his drink so hard I thought he might die right there. His face turned the color of old newspaper, pale and gray and full of shame. The applause died faster than roadkill on hot asphalt. Before I tell you how this single night turned my whole family upside down and exposed 20 years of lies and manipulation, please hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below with where you're watching from: New York, Lagos, Toronto, London. I'd love to know where my real family is listening tonight. My name is Sarah Derrick, and I'm 38 years old. For the last 15 years, I've been working as a senior financial advisor at a wealth management firm in downtown Miami. I make good money, damn good money, and I've built a life that should make any parent proud. I have a wonderful husband named David, 2 kids who light up my world, and a mortgage on a house in a neighborhood where I actually feel safe walking at night. But none of that ever seemed to matter to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. See, I've always been the quiet provider in my family. The one who showed up with cash when the lights were about to be cut off. The one who paid for groceries when the fridge was empty. The one who covered hospital bills and car repairs and school supplies without ever asking for a thank you. I was the invisible safety net that kept everyone else from hitting rock bottom, but somehow I was also the family disappointment. How's that for twisted logic? I grew up in a household where love was conditional and respect had to be earned daily, but the rules for earning it changed faster than Miami weather. My sister Carmen was the golden child, the charming one who could talk her way out of anything, but never talked her way into a steady job. My parents worshipped the ground she walked on, even when that ground was usually the floor of some friend's couch, because she couldn't keep an apartment. But me? I was just Sarah. Reliable Sarah. Boring Sarah. Sarah who paid the bills and fixed the problems and never got invited to the family group chat where they planned their fun outings. This dinner was supposed to be different. God, I was so naive. It was Dad's 65th birthday, and I had this stupid, romantic idea that maybe, just maybe, this would be the night they finally saw me. Really saw me. I spent 3 days preparing for this celebration. 3 days of my life I'll never get back, planning a feast fit for a king who turned out to be nothing more than a beggar in borrowed clothes. I rented out the back room at Versailles, this Cuban restaurant in Little Havana that cost me $800 just for the space. I ordered enough food to feed a small army: croquetas, lechon, arroz con pollo, the works. I invited every relative within driving distance, sent out personalized invitations like this was some kind of royal wedding. I bought Dad a vintage watch that cost more than most people make in a month, had it engraved with Para el mejor Papa del Mundo, to the best father in the world. The irony of that engraving burns like acid in my throat now. I spent my entire Saturday shopping for ingredients because I insisted on making his favorite dessert myself, this elaborate tres leches cake that takes hours to prepare properly. My husband kept asking me why I was going to such lengths, why I was stressing myself out over people who barely acknowledged my existence most days. But I had this vision, this beautiful, pathetic vision of Dad standing up at the end of the night with tears in his eyes, finally telling everyone how proud he was of his daughter Sarah. How I'd always been there for the family. How I was the backbone that held everything together. What a fucking joke that turned out to be. I showed up early to set everything up, brought speakers for music, arranged the flowers myself, made sure every detail was perfect. I wanted this to be the night that changed everything between us. The night he finally looked at me the way he looked at Carmen. With pride instead of disappointment. With love instead of obligation. But the moment the first guests started arriving, I knew something was wrong. The energy was all off, like walking into a funeral when you thought you were going to a wedding. Uncle Miguel barely made eye contact when he hugged me. Tia Rosa gave me one of those tight, fake smiles that women perfect when they're about to stab you in the back. Even my cousins seemed distant, answering my attempts at conversation with one-word responses and nervous glances toward the door. Dad walked in 40 minutes late, which should have been my first real warning sign. He's never late to anything, especially when free food is involved. But there he was, avoiding my eyes like I had some kind of contagious disease, mumbling a half-hearted thanks for organizing everything. When I tried to hug him, my own father on his birthday, he patted my back like he was burping a baby and pulled away so fast you'd think I was radioactive. Mom was even worse. She kept wringing her hands and giving me these looks like she was at my execution instead of a birthday party. Every time I tried to start a conversation with her, she'd find some excuse to walk away. I tengo que revisar los aperitivos. Déjame salir a prima Sofia. Always running, always avoiding, always treating me like I was the problem in the room. Carmen showed up an hour late with some new boyfriend whose name I never caught because he spent the entire night glued to his phone. She gave me this weird air kiss greeting that felt more like a business transaction than a sisterly hello. Throughout the cocktail hour, I caught her whispering with various relatives, their eyes darting toward me every few seconds like they were discussing classified information. The small talk felt like walking through quicksand. Every conversation died the moment I joined it. I'd approach a group of cousins laughing about something, and suddenly they'd all find their drinks fascinating. I tried putting on background music, boleros, Dad's favorite, but even Benny Moore couldn't cut through the tension that was thick enough to choke on. My gut was screaming that something was wrong, but I kept pushing down that feeling. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. That maybe everyone was just tired or stressed about their own problems. I mean, these were the same people I'd been supporting financially for years. The same people whose kids I'd bought Christmas presents for when their parents couldn't afford them. The same people whose medical bills I'd helped cover without being asked. Surely they couldn't all turn on me at once, right? Wrong. So incredibly, devastatingly wrong. The food was perfect. The restaurant staff complimented me on the organization. Everything looked like a Pinterest board for perfect Cuban family gathering. But underneath all that Instagram-worthy presentation was a foundation of lies and betrayal that I was too blind to see. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. Maybe I was so desperate for their approval that I ignored every red flag waving in my face. Dinner started normally enough. Everyone found their seats, complimented the food, made the usual small talk about work and weather, and whose kid was doing what in school. I was starting to relax, thinking maybe I'd imagined the weirdness earlier. Maybe this could still be the night I'd dreamed about. Then Dad stood up. He didn't stand up the way people do when they're about to give a heartfelt toast. He stood up like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. The entire table went silent, and I felt this cold dread start to creep up my spine like ice water. Everyone was looking at him with these expectant faces, like they all knew what was coming except me. Quiero decir algo, Dad announced, his voice carrying across the room with the authority of a judge about to pass sentence. About family. About contribution. About what it really means to be part of this family. I sat there smiling like an idiot, thinking he was about to thank me for organizing this whole thing. Maybe he'd mention how I'd been there for everyone over the years. Maybe he'd finally acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made. Instead, he looked directly at me with eyes full of disappointment and said the words that shattered my world. Sarah, you never contributed anything to this family. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, one by one, like some kind of choreographed nightmare, people started clapping. Uncle Miguel started it, then Tia Rosa joined in, then my cousins, then even some of the people I'd personally helped financially over the years. They were applauding my public humiliation like it was the greatest performance they'd ever witnessed. My sister Carmen wasn't clapping, but she wasn't defending me either. She just sat there staring at her plate like a coward, refusing to meet my eyes. My mother had her hands folded in her lap, but I could see the approval in her face. She agreed with this character assassination. My own mother thought I was a burden on the family I'd been secretly supporting for decades. The words hit me like a physical blow. 20 years of financial support. 20 years of being there for every crisis, every emergency, every desperate phone call. 20 years of putting their needs before my own family's vacation fund, before my kids' college savings, before my own peace of mind. And this is what I got in return. Public humiliation at a party I'd organized and paid for, in honor of a man who apparently thought I was worthless. My chest felt like it was caught in a vice. My throat closed up so tight I could barely breathe. Every face around that table was looking at me with varying degrees of satisfaction, like they'd all been waiting years for someone to finally put me in my place. Like I'd been walking around thinking I was better than them, when the truth was I'd been the family ATM this whole time and didn't even know it. But then something amazing happened. Something I never expected. Instead of breaking down, instead of crying or begging for forgiveness for sins I'd never committed, I felt this white-hot rage build up inside me like a volcano about to erupt. 20 years of swallowed pride, 20 years of unacknowledged sacrifices, 20 years of being treated like the family fuck-up while secretly being the family savior. It all came rushing to the surface at once. I forced a smile. Not a real smile. I was way past that, but the kind of smile you give someone right before you destroy their entire world. I leaned back in my chair, looked around the table at all these people who thought they'd finally broken me, and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "Perfect. Then the $6,000 I've been paying for your mortgage every month stops today." Dad's reaction was immediate and devastating. He was mid-sip when I said it, and he choked so hard on his wine that it sprayed across the white tablecloth like a crime scene. His face went from that smug, self-righteous expression to pure panic in about 2 seconds. The color drained out of his cheeks so fast I thought he might pass out right there. "'Kay?" he gasped, still coughing up wine. The entire table had gone dead silent again, but this time the energy was completely different. Instead of smug satisfaction, I could feel confusion and fear radiating from every person in that room. They were looking back and forth between Dad and me like they were watching a tennis match, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. "You heard me," I said, my voice getting stronger with every word. $6,000. Every month. For the past 4 years. Did you think the bank just decided to lower your mortgage payment out of the goodness of their hearts? Mom's fork clattered against her plate. She was staring at me like I'd just confessed to murder. "Sarah, ¿de qué estás hablando?" "I'm talking about the phone call you made to me 4 years ago, crying because you were 3 months behind on the mortgage and about to lose the house. Remember that, Mommy? You begged me not to tell Dad because you'd been using the mortgage money to pay for Carmen's rehab." Again. Carmen's new boyfriend looked confused, but Carmen herself had gone completely white. She knew. The bitch had known all along where the money was coming from. "I'm talking about taking out a second mortgage on my own house to cover your down payment on the new car when yours died. I'm talking about the $8,000 I spent on Dad's hernia surgery when insurance wouldn't cover it all. I'm talking about the $1,500 a month I've been sending to help with utilities and groceries because Social Security doesn't cover shit." Uncle Miguel was shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Sarah, if this is true." "If this is true?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh you hear in horror movies right before someone snaps completely. "Miguel, who do you think paid for Sophia's quinceañera when you couldn't afford it? Who covered little Miguelito's emergency room visit when he broke his arm and you didn't have insurance?" Miguel's wife grabbed his arm, her face pale with realization. They knew. They all fucking knew, deep down, that someone had been covering the bills they couldn't pay. They just never bothered to ask who or why. "And you," I said, turning to Tia Rosa. 3 months ago when your husband lost his job and you called me sobbing about losing the apartment. Who do you think has been covering your rent? Rosa was crying now, but I was way past caring about anyone's tears except my own. I'd cried enough over these people to fill Biscayne Bay. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, standing up now because sitting down felt too passive for the rage flowing through my veins. Since I apparently contribute nothing to this family, you won't mind if I stop contributing everything to this family. I pulled out my phone and started reading from my banking app, my voice getting louder and more vicious with each revelation. October mortgage payment to First National Bank, $6,000 canceled. Monthly utility assistance to Derek household, $300 canceled. Grocery allowance for the family, $400 canceled. Dad was trying to speak, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. Carmen's car insurance, $150 a month canceled. Mom's diabetes medication that insurance won't cover, $200 a month canceled. The cell phone plan for the entire family that I've been paying for 3 years, $350 a month canceled. Carmen finally found her voice. Sarah, you can't just. I can't just what? I screamed, and I mean screamed. Every person in that restaurant turned to look at our table. I can't just stop financing the lives of people who think I'm worthless. I can't just stop being your personal ATM after you publicly humiliate me. The tears were coming now, hot and angry and 20 years overdue. I have spent the last 2 decades of my life making sure none of you ever had to worry about money. I have sacrificed my own family's financial security to keep this family afloat. I have missed my kids' soccer games and dance recitals because I was working overtime to pay for your emergencies. I turned to Dad, who was still trying to process what was happening. You want to know what contribution looks like, Papa? It looks like your daughter working 70-hour weeks to afford your medicine. It looks like me telling my own children we can't go to Disney World this year because Abuelo needs surgery. It looks like me driving a 10-year-old car while I pay for everyone else's new ones. The room was dead silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing and Rosa's quiet sobbing. Every eye was on me, but for the first time in my life, it wasn't because I was being blamed for something. It was because they were finally seeing me. You know what the most fucked up part is? I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than my screaming had. I did it because I love you. All of you. Even when you treated me like I wasn't worth the air I breathe, I still loved you enough to make sure you had roofs over your heads and food on your tables. I looked around the table at these people who had raised me, who had shaped me, who had apparently spent years resenting me while living off my generosity. But love isn't supposed to be a one-way transaction. Love isn't supposed to make you feel small and worthless and invisible. Dad finally found his voice. Mija, we didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I cut him off. You didn't want to know where the money was coming from because that would have meant acknowledging that the daughter you've spent my entire life calling a disappointment was actually the one keeping this family from falling apart. I grabbed my purse and coat, done with this nightmare masquerading as a birthday party. Carmen knew. She's known for years where the money was coming from. Every time she called me crying about her rent or her car payment or her latest crisis, she knew exactly who was going to fix it. But she sat there tonight and let you humiliate me anyway. Carmen was full on crying now, mascara running down her cheeks like black rivers. Sarah, please, I wanted to tell them You just what? You just thought it was easier to let them think I was the family failure while you played the struggling victim? You just thought it was more convenient to keep your mouth shut while Dad tore me apart in front of everyone. I turned back to the table one more time, these people who had been my world for 38 years. Here's my final contribution to this family, the truth. The truth is that I've been supporting all of you for decades while you treated me like garbage. The truth is that without my money, half of you will be homeless within 6 months. The truth is that I am done. I started walking toward the door, but I wasn't finished talking. The words were pouring out of me like blood from a wound that had been infected for 20 years. You want to know what happened when my son broke his leg last year? I couldn't afford to take time off work to stay with him in the hospital because I had used all my vacation days covering for Dad's doctor appointments. You want to know why my daughter is in public school instead of the private school all her friends attend? Because I've been paying for Carmen's rehab stints instead of my own child's education. The entire restaurant was staring now, but I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them see what family betrayal looks like. You want to know why my marriage almost fell apart 2 years ago? Because my husband couldn't understand why I was choosing my parents' mortgage over our own financial stability. Why I was choosing people who barely acknowledged my existence over the man who actually loves me. I stopped at the door and turned around one last time. But here's what you're never going to know. What it feels like to have a daughter who actually gives a damn about your opinion. What it feels like to have someone sacrifice everything for your happiness. What it feels like to be loved unconditionally by someone you've spent decades treating like shit. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the shocked silence from earlier, but the heavy, suffocating silence of people who knew they had fucked up beyond redemption. I walked out of that restaurant and sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying harder than I had since I was a child. Not just crying, sobbing, screaming, letting out 20 years of suppressed pain and rage and disappointment. My phone started buzzing almost immediately, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to hear their excuses or their apologies or their promises to do better. The drive home was a blur of tears and traffic lights. When I finally pulled into my driveway, David was waiting on the porch. He took one look at my face and knew that everything I had warned him might happen had actually happened. He didn't ask questions. He just held me while I cried and told him the whole story between sobs. "I'm proud of you," he said when I finished. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but what you did tonight took incredible strength." He was right. It didn't feel like strength. It felt like destruction. Like I had just blown up the only family I had ever known, even if that family had been slowly poisoning me for decades. But over the next few days, as my phone continued to buzz with increasingly desperate voicemails and text messages, I started to see what David meant. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't checking my bank account every morning to see how much I could afford to send to someone else. For the first time in years, I wasn't losing sleep over someone else's financial crisis. The messages started apologetic, but quickly turned accusatory. Dad left a voicemail calling me selfish and ungrateful. Mom sent a text saying I was destroying the family out of spite. Carmen wrote me a long email explaining how she had been protecting me by not telling our parents about my financial contributions, as if keeping secrets had been some kind of favor. But the worst messages came from the extended family. Uncle Miguel sent a brutal text calling me heartless for abandoning my parents in their old age. Tia Rosa left a voicemail saying I was being cruel and vindictive. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions about my character and my obligations. The narrative they were spinning was incredible. Somehow, I had become the villain in this story. I was the selfish daughter who had abandoned her family in their time of need. I was the heartless bitch who had pulled the rug out from under poor, innocent people who had done nothing wrong. The gaslighting was so intense and coordinated that I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Had I overreacted? Was I being cruel? Maybe I should have handled things differently, talked to them privately instead of exploding publicly. But then David showed me something that changed everything. He had been quietly documenting my financial contributions to my family for years, worried about the impact on our own financial security. He pulled out a folder thick with bank statements, receipts, and records that painted a picture I hadn't fully grasped myself. "Sarah," he said gently, "in the last 5 years alone, you've sent your family over $200,000. That's more than most people make in 4 years. That's our kids' college fund. That's our retirement savings. That's the down payment on the bigger house we never bought." Seeing it all laid out like that was devastating. $200,000. Money that could have changed my children's lives, spent on people who thought I contributed nothing. Money that could have secured my family's future, given to people who publicly humiliated me for my lack of contribution. But the real betrayal was still coming. 3 weeks after the dinner, Tia Rosa called me. Not to apologize, I had given up hoping for apologies by then, but to tell me something that shattered what was left of my heart. "Sarah, Mija, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. "About that night at the restaurant. About what your father said." My blood went cold. "What about it?" "It wasn't spontaneous. They planned it. Your parents, Carmen, even some of the cousins. They had been talking for months about how to get you to reduce your financial support." I almost dropped the phone. "What are you talking about?" "They thought if they made you feel bad enough, if they hurt your feelings, you would try harder to prove yourself. They thought you would increase the payments, maybe even offer to buy them a new house." The room started spinning. "You're telling me that my father's speech was planned? That the whole thing was a setup?" "See, Mija. Carmen told them you were too soft and that you would do anything to make them proud. She said you had more money than you knew what to do with and that they just needed to make you feel guilty enough to share more of it." I hung up the phone and vomited. Actually vomited. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, so evil that my body couldn't process it. They hadn't just taken my money, they had orchestrated my public humiliation as a manipulation tactic. They had planned to break my heart as a way to open my wallet wider. Carmen had been the architect of it all. My own sister, who I had supported through 3 rehab stints, 2 failed businesses, and countless personal crises, had convinced our parents to emotionally abuse me as a fundraising strategy. The worst part was that it had almost worked. If I hadn't had 20 years of rage built up inside me, if I hadn't reached my absolute breaking point, I probably would have left that restaurant feeling terrible about myself and started sending even more money. I would have doubled down on proving my worth to people who saw me as nothing more than a piggy bank. That night, I blocked every single one of their phone numbers. I closed the joint bank account that I had been using to send them money. I changed my will to remove all of them as beneficiaries. I deleted every photo of them from my social media accounts. I erased 20 years of family history because 20 years of family history had apparently been built on lies and exploitation. David found me in our home office at 3 in the morning, surrounded by financial records and legal documents, officially severing every tie I had to the people who had raised me. "Are you okay?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. "I'm free," I said, and for the first time since the dinner, I actually smiled. For the first time in my adult life, I'm free. And I was. Free from the constant anxiety about other people's financial crises. Free from the guilt of putting my own family second. Free from the exhausting cycle of giving and giving and giving to people who saw my generosity as weakness rather than love. The consequences for them were swift and brutal. Dad and Mom lost the house within 6 months, just like I had predicted. They had to move in with Carmen, who was barely keeping her own apartment. Uncle Miguel's family had to downsize to a 1-bedroom apartment. Tia Rosa moved back to Cuba to live with relatives. I heard about all of this through mutual friends, people who were shocked by how quickly the family fell apart once my financial support disappeared. It should have felt like vindication, but mostly it just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that they had never appreciated what they had. Sad that they had chosen manipulation over honesty, exploitation over love. But I wasn't sad enough to go back. Not sad enough to resume the role of family ATM. Not sad enough to accept their eventual apologies, which came about a year later when they realized I was serious about cutting ties. Dad called on my birthday, crying and begging for forgiveness. Mom showed up at my kids' school, trying to see her grandchildren. Carmen wrote letters explaining how sorry she was, how she had made a terrible mistake, how the family was falling apart without me. I didn't respond to any of it. Not because I'm heartless, but because I finally understood that love shouldn't require financial transactions. Family shouldn't be conditional on your ability to solve everyone else's problems. Respect shouldn't have to be purchased with decades of sacrifice. My real family, David and our 2 beautiful children, understood this instinctively. They loved me not because of what I could provide for them, but because of who I am. They respected my work and my sacrifices not because they benefited from them, but because they saw the person behind the provider. That's what family is supposed to feel like. Safe. Supportive. Unconditional. Not transactional, not manipulative, not dependent on your ability to write checks for other people's mistakes. It's been 3 years since that dinner now. 3 years since I walked out of that restaurant and out of their lives. My children don't ask about their grandparents anymore. Kids are remarkably adaptable when they're shown what healthy relationships look like. David and I took that Disney vacation we had been putting off for years. We bought the bigger house. We started saving for our kids' college funds again. But more importantly, I learned to love myself enough to demand the love I deserve. I learned that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're self-respect. I learned that you can't build healthy relationships with people who see you as a resource rather than a person. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting off my family, if I miss them, if I think I was too harsh. And honestly, I miss the family I thought I had. I miss the parents I thought I deserved. I miss the sister I thought was my best friend. But I don't miss the anxiety. I don't miss the exploitation. I don't miss being treated like I was worthless by people whose lives I was literally funding. I don't miss the version of myself who was so desperate for approval that she would sacrifice her own family's security for people who couldn't even be bothered to say thank you. If you've ever been wrongly accused by family after all your sacrifices, I see you. I know your pain. I know how it feels to love people who treat your love like a commodity. I know how it feels to give everything you have to people who act like you've never given them anything. And I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve to have your sacrifices acknowledged, not exploited. You deserve to put yourself and your immediate family first without feeling guilty about it. Family isn't who shares your blood, family is who shares your values. Family is who loves you unconditionally, who supports your dreams, who celebrates your successes instead of resenting them. Family is who sees your worth even when you can't see it yourself. And if you watched till now, please subscribe, because these stories matter, and your voice deserves to be heard. Drop a comment below and share your story, because I promise you're not alone in this. There are thousands of us out here who have been the family providers, the family fixers, the family scapegoats. And we all deserve to know that our worth isn't measured by our bank account balance or our willingness to sacrifice ourselves for people who don't appreciate the sacrifice. You are enough. You have always been enough. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve a place at your table.